Welcome to the On Wonder podcast. We're talking to leaders and changemakers in this series, and we are so excited for this episode because we have someone who many of you will recognize right away from his work with literacy and assistive technology with students. He's the CEO and founder of Building Wings. We have Don Johnston joining us. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Sarah. Brenda.
We're so excited to have you here. This is a big deal for Brenda and me.
Yes, yes. Your company, Don Johnston, has come out with things over the years that we've all used, and some people might not even know that was a Don Johnston product, right? It was like, oh, did you use Draft Builder, Co-Writer? So, different things from before, and it's like, oh, no.
Go way back. You go
Yes,
way back.
yes. I know I was like 5 years old, but yes, no. But we like to start off by asking, is there a particular student in your career who inspired you or kind of like your why in this whole industry?
Yeah, I try to get into classrooms at least every month, and there's always it's not a particular student, but there's always students that I think about when we make decisions about products.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so there's a whole series of, there's probably dozens, maybe 50 or 60 students that I think about. And each one, in December, I was in Janesville, Wisconsin, in schools there. And there's some students that really touched me. They were, with obstacles that they had to face, you could just see their effort and how hard they were working to become literate and to learn, and those things really touch me deeply. And so it's not a particular student, but many. Uh,
Mhm.
I also have family members, nieces, on the autism spectrum and with cerebral palsy, and those experiences touch me deeply also.
Well, and for those who maybe don't know, you have also your personal experience and your
Right.
autobiography, Building Wings, is a book people can find about that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I didn't become a reader until ninth grade, and in many ways, I was given up on, like so many of our students. And I had the story of Building Wings is about my journey to become a reader and to uh, become successful at being literate. And it's particularly filled with a story about my teacher, Mrs. Tedesco, and her expectations of me, and her demand that I become literate, and become a learner. And so that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, those high expectations, and you had dyslexia,
Right.
right?
I
Right.
have dyslexia.
You have dyslexia. Sorry, yeah. And so you had that effort you were talking about. You see when you're going into classrooms the effort it took kids
Yeah.
and how.
Yeah, I think that's such a critical thing. I think all students really want to be successful. And I talk about in Building Wings how when started school, I really envisioned myself being successful. And I just had one failure after another, and things just wouldn't stick in my head. And and uh, uh, and I think that's what goes on with most of our students. They really want to be successful. They really want to learn. They really want to be readers. And there's just a lot, especially with complex learners. There's just a lot of things that get in the way. And and I think our job as a product development company is how do we eliminate and minimize as many of those obstacles as possible so that they can concentrate on being successful.
Well, and you guys do a great job with that. Do you have, I mean, do you know how many products you have right now? I was trying to think. I know
Oh,
Retopia is, being, it's just it's a hot.
right now we have, you know, the Don Johnston company was acquired by uh, Textel, and so I'm no longer involved with that company. So the assistive technology we've kind of let go, and by combining those two companies, I think in the long run will help with future development. And what Building Wings was basically split off from Don Johnston in order to really focus on complex learners and building curriculum. And we have about, I want to say, about 5 products. Our most recent one is we've taken Tar Heel Reader from University of North Carolina and Karen Erickson, and we have built a product called Monarch. We have Right now we have 26,000 books that have been reviewed, and that's free for everybody.
Yeah, that's a great product.
And then
That's
we
like
have
a gift.
Utopia,
Yeah.
Utopia Go. We have News Currents, Newstopia, and yeah, so several different products.
In early in my career, I was an assistive technology specialist for a school district in Washington, and the Don Johnson products were really a little bit more for high incidence, right? Like I remember, like I was saying, like co-writer, graph builder, those kind of things, and I remember fighting the district like, okay, so the kids need an email address, and it'd be like, oh no, we can't give kids email addresses, right? We've come a long ways in technology, and no matter what is new, there's fear around all that. And again, the new thing now is more like AI, and our kids going to be using Chat GPT, and like what's happening with literacy around, artificial intelligence. But back then, there was just as much concern about Co-Writer. And for those of you who don't know, Co-Writer is a word prediction program that we all have on our phones, right? Right. I mean, it's like it's mainstream at this point. It was not then. And so I remember every step of the way, there is always what I sometimes refer to with Simon Sinek as like the laggards, right? I don't know. I'm gonna keep my dial-up internet. You know what I mean? Like, I like the dragging of the feet. But what I appreciated about your company was you were always so generous with your training people on your technology. And talk to us a little bit about um, your business model and getting buy-in on new technology.
Well, it's always a struggle, as you know. But the key, my philosophy is, how do we build success? How do we engage students? And I think the biggest impact on engagement is making them successful. And
Mhm.
and co-writer is a good example because there's so many things that you have to be successful with in order to be a writer. And
Mhm.
if we can take many of those things, you don't have to worry about spelling, you don't have to worry about your grammar, and we're going to let you concentrate your effort on what you want to write.
Mhm.
Uh, I think that is what engages students and makes them successful. And so
Mhm.
what we're trying to do is take as many things as possible and allow that student to focus on what they need to focus on.
Mhm.
And that it's the same is true for reading. If we could eliminate so many of the things, and reading is really a thinking process. How do I think about what we're reading about?
Mhm.
And if I could think about that, then I could understand what I'm reading.
Hmm.
That's true. And, kind of going back to what Brenda said, I remember you would have, is it the learning summits, or, you would
Yeah,
fly people, have people come to you and learn. And it wasn't just about products, it was about changing mindsets.
yeah.
That book Shift, is that what it was? And so much, there was so much to gain from that.
Training and customer support has always been a really key. It, you know, I think our success has really been about how do we make teachers successful? How do we
Mhm,
make educators successful? And if we could provide and a lot of times all they need is how do I get started?
mm,
It's a little overwhelming, and when it's kind of like writing a paper. At the point that you write your first sentence, you're like 50% done.
mm,
And for working with our students, how do we get people started with this? And once they get started, then they're on their way. And
mhm.
our focus always has been how do we get people started? How do we, build that training and build those experiences?
What I've appreciated about your products and in about currently kind of Retopia and building wings for those that haven't seen it is you allow students to add access age appropriate curriculum. So you've adapted the situation so that if you're an eighth grader, you're going to be writing eighth grade material. You're not writing, you know, C spot run, And I feel like maybe before the vocabulary was popular of age appropriate, right? You had a mindset of, okay, what are we learning about at this age? And let's provide materials around it so that we're not, when we simplify the materials down to whatever, a kindergarten level, because that's the reading level, we send such a message to those students that they aren't smart, and that's a lifelong battle of, as you well know, and I also didn't read till third grade, so I have my own dyslexia issues, and man, the how you view yourself when you are a late reader or a late writer or both is lifelong. So I feel like one thing I appreciate about you is your ability to challenge the thinking that we don't need to, we need to have the tools match the age appropriate curriculum.
Right, right. And a lot of that comes out of my own experience at trying to learn to read and going to the library and saying, what books can I read? And then picking some books and then, being bullied that they were baby books.
Hmm.
And so I have a real felt meaning of reading, the books that you can read could be baby books, could be, books that are not age
Yeah,
appropriate. And
right.
so that's always been something that we've really worked at.
Yeah, I remember I read Six Ducks in a Pond for 3 years straight because that's where my reading level never got better. So I just read the same book over. I mean,
Uh,
the same reading book. There was no strategy, right, to up the game. So I knew the stories already, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's always been a real big focus, and we've created a lot of content over the years uh,
yes,
that are age appropriate, and we say considerate text.
mm-hmm, hmm,
Right. And you've maintained the vocabulary and the important things in the text.
hmm,
Yeah, we actively control the vocabulary that we use, and so we only use so many higher level tier two words, tier two tier three words, and we control the number of core words that we use, and uh, and then we introduce at each level, uh, so many and not too many more advanced words, and that allows us to uh, be more age appropriate
Mhm.
because we're writing about the same concepts.
Mhm.
Right. So you mentioned um, getting started, when you have technology or you have a teacher that needs to get started or a student that needs to get started. And once they do, they're off, right? Um, but how do you get people started? Like, what are some things that you've learned along the way?
Well, a lot of it is just doing it, and so uh, uh, just like with students, we have to find out what gets in the way.
Mm,
Uh, I think we have the same thing with educators in that a lot of times it's like I don't know where to find this resource. Uh, I don't know how to do shared reading, and so if we can point to where those resources are, uh, and then give people an opportunity just to experience those resources, then I think that's what gets them on the way. There's that, and I think the other thing is how do we raise expectations and expect more from our students.
hmm
That's another important thing that it's real easy to say, well, my students aren't ready for this. And so a lot of times people don't try. And so people need to see that other people are having success with their students.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
That's a good point.
A lot of times you go into a school that has one class that's being successful, and everybody's looking at that class and
Mhm.
looking at students that other people had given up on, and I think that's another really important thing.
That's true. I can think of a class like that in a school I've worked at, and the great thing is the I think the students are excited, the teachers are excited too. So in that class, that teacher is so excited because they're seeing all this, they have that high expectation, they're seeing what's come from that. So I think often they're willing to share about it, which is so nice because I don't think educators get to see a lot of what happens in other people's classrooms.
Yeah,
That's
word of mouth travels quickly, and so when people have success, there's usually a lot of word of mouth about it.
Yeah, you create a buzz, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
you get kind of an early adopter, somebody who's willing to try it, and then you have those success stories floating around.
Yep.
But it's kind of grassroots starting, because a big movement, there's always some resistance.
what did high expectations look like for you when you were learning in school?
Well, the I tell the story in Building Wings about Mrs. Tedesco, and she basically insisted that I be successful. And I think for most of my experience up until I had her in eighth grade, and so in eighth grade I became a learner. In ninth grade I became a reader, uh,
Mm,
and she was clearly demanding, and she had such high expectations and they never wavered. My experience before that is that teachers mostly gave up, and they'd give up on me, and they lowered their expectations,
mm,
and they concentrate. I was a bit of a behavior problem, and so all they wanted me to do was behave in class and
hmm
not disrupt the class, and then they were happy.
Mm,
But I was disruptive because I felt bad about myself as a learner.
mhm,
right.
and when Mrs. Tedesco expected more, she would say, I'm going to put your paper at the top of the stack every night, and I'm going to look at it first.
Mm,
She was basically saying, I'm expecting you to be successful here.
Mhm.
And what it did was create this cognitive dissonance. And I'm like, what does she see in me that I don't see in me?
mm,
Mhm.
And I think once you have that belief,
Mhm.
or you have a teacher that believes in you, uh, it does something to your feelings about yourself as a learner.
wow. Yeah. And that's something that we can all do, right? Even if we're not sure what the resources are, what the tools are that we need in the moment for that person, we can all have high expectations and let the students
Yeah,
know.
and that's easier said than done. I mean, teachers have lots of obstacles that they have to face every day,
Hmm.
and a lot of things that get in the way and distract from their focus on teaching. And
Hmm.
Mhm.
that's how do we uh, how does a teacher, how does an educator focus on that expectation, the expectations that they need? I think everybody, uh, when educators are in school, in college, becoming, getting their degrees, I don't think they think of themselves as being a babysitter. Uh, I think
Right.
they see themselves helping students be successful. And
Hmm.
how do we anchor those feelings and thoughts back?
Right.
Mhm.
In the middle of putting out fires here and there and
Exactly. They're dealing with this problem and that problem, and by the time they get done, they're exhausted.
Mhm. Mhm. What are some of those guiding principles that have endured in the field of education, special education, that kind of remain the same despite the advances in technology?
Well, when I look back, and I have this conversation with Karen Erickson frequently, back, 30, 35, I don't even know how many years ago that we go back, uh, talking about the expectations of back then our expectation of kids is they would hit a switch and fireworks go off on their computer screen.
mm,
And I got so tired of producing more and more cause effect software. And
Mhm.
and and Karen Erickson was back then saying, how do we move people and make people readers and
Mhm.
make people learners? And so I think it's important to think about how far we've come and look at where do we need to go.
Mhm.
We do have a long way to go in order to uh, change attitudes, in order to uh, make the expectations of our school system uh, uh, be more success oriented.
Mhm.
And so I think keeping that perspective, I think is a start. And I think the other thing is our laws. When we come in and when the states and the federal government comes in and says we have certain expectations of these learners, I think that's a really important factor too,
yes,
Mhm.
like the DLM
right?
states and
That has such a high impact because people go, okay, we need to change our focus. We need to make people literate. We need to uh, work with these students to be learners, and that changes everything. That moves away from our education system providing babysitting service
Mhm.
and toward real learning,
hmm.
real success for our students. Most of our focus has been how do we take the research that largely has been done by Karen Erickson and the Literacy Center in North Carolina. And how do we incorporate that and work together with them to bring research into our products and and uh, uh, and research alone, it takes more than just research. It takes the co-development of research and how do we build products that educators can use successfully. And so by combining those two things, I think is what it takes to build a successful product line.
And interesting that you've been working with Karen Erickson for what did you say, 40 years or something?
Oh, probably. She'd be embarrassed how many years it's been. But yeah, we've gone back a long time, and we've worked together on a lot of projects.
Yeah. Well, there's so much great work coming from her and from
That whole group
that whole
is
group. Yeah.
fantastic, and her one of the big things that has had huge impact on the field is her book with David Copenhaver on comprehensive literacy for all. The impact that that's had has just been enormous.
It's
Hmm.
true. Brenda and I talk about it a lot. And when we do consultations with teams, we're talking about it. I feel like we talk about it all the time.
Book studies, yeah.
It's one of those books that what can help with our expectations. Like this is the research and this is what evidence-based practices for literacy strategies for these students. But it's one of those books that you read it and you reread it and then you read it again and you learn something different or you think about it in a different way when you meet a different student, right?
I have two books, and they're dog-eared in so many places. They're almost almost falling apart.
Right, right.
But they have all my notes.
Takes me back to in our very first series that we did on leaders and change makers. We had Carolyn Messawhite,
Yeah.
and she said, I like the term presume competence, but what if we start with presume potential? And that kind of goes back to what you're saying too. Like I had to be a learner before I became a reader,
Right.
right? And so it's not that there's precursors to any of this, but I'm just saying like the first steps are presuming the potential for reading and being in classrooms where reading instruction is available to our students. I'm an AAC evaluator and I'm trainer, and I work with kids that are not functionally verbal. So the minute that you say, well, they can't speak, well, then how will I ever know if they're actually reading? They don't have an out loud voice to tell me they're reading. And then they're in a classroom, even just the system of physical disabilities are being put together as opposed to putting children in classrooms based on their cognitive abilities, right? And it's like the system itself is setting up some of our kids with complex bodies where they're not even exposed to the instruction. How do we get around that?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. And I think how do we teach? I'm real big on background information and world knowledge. And because I, I had to achieve a certain level of world knowledge before I was able to read. You just don't pick up words and understand it without a certain level of background information.
Life
Uh,
experience.
and I think a part of it is just seeing other classrooms. There's a school in Boston, the Carter School, and a lot of those kids are in bodies that just don't function, and pretty much all they have is a yes no, and they don't have the ability to point to a communication system or use scanning. Uh, but they work with a yes no on everybody, and to see them to see those teachers there uh, be able to, I just remember I was there before the election, and they had students voting with yes no, and they would move the students around in their wheelchairs. These are the people that are voting for, actually, they were voting for the next book they were going to do in Retopia. And they would move people over, and they had me talk about each different book, and then they would change their votes. It was quite a learning experience with students that really didn't have a lot of ability to communicate, and
Mhm.
but they worked with what they had, and
Mhm.
that's been the key. And I think that's something that I'm really interested in when we look at the future. How do we take a wide and keep expanding the range of the students? How do we look at critical vision and incorporate that? Uh, we're not where I'd like us to be on some of those issues.
Mhm.
And I think in the future, I'd just like, how do we think about all the full range of complex learners that we have, and how do we accommodate each one?
But you touch on something where, well, I remember doing March Madness with books, right? And so my group of 16 students all picked a book, and and some of them were baby books in the sense that they were younger because that's what they always were read to them. And so it was their favorite book, right? But even then, I had them pick four of their favorite books and then vote. And they almost never picked the ones the parents had been reading every single night because interested to find out that, something new and novel was actually their new favorite. But as I've gone through things like that where they're reading and they're voting, there are ways to look at comprehension without testing in by saying, look at all the kids that are voting for this book and what's so exciting about this and why is that? And it would be because it was new, it was novel. No one, the books that would win would be ones that no one had ever heard of prior to right, like right, new and novel seems to be a pretty big deal. And and even different vocabulary, it's like, oh, that, yeah, I wondered, I mean, that was her favorite book, so she threw it in the March Madness, but I wondered if people were going to know much about that, right? And even I consider myself a pretty strong believer in kids' abilities, and I still had to be adjusted on that belief system of, oh, no, they can do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the whole engagement factor, I think, is just really interesting. And we're always looking, we produce 7 or 8 articles every week with news currents.
Hmm.
And we have an editorial meeting every Monday, and we look at what do we think our students are going to be interested in. And it always varies. And I have a report from yesterday of how many clicks on each story, and it's amazing how there'll be a story that I didn't think was that interesting, and gee, it was. The whole issue of how do we teach people about the world, I think is really interesting. And how do we provide a variety of experiences and a variety of engagement uh,
Mhm.
for different topics?
Right.
It's true. And I think something kind of exciting about the news idea and what you're doing is that the students are sitting around the dinner table and hearing things that their parents are talking about, right? Or peers are talking about. And they're, I've heard about that and I know something about that.
Right, exactly. And then, learning is like a layered process. You know some this much, and you keep building upon, you keep adding layers onto it.
Yeah, I remember a student telling a story to me, and it was, about in very limited switch access, very limited vocabulary, some yes and no's for sure. And her made up story was about a girl and a mom and being scared and hearing noises. And the mom said, "Oh yeah, we had all the footage on Black Lives Matter on all night last night. And the girl was about 4 or something, and I was like, sounds like she's listening, you know. So it's like, how do we, if that's it's she was mom was so surprised, right? That she was taking all of it in. But it's like, what is she, how is that landing for her with her life experiences, right? How do we incorporate what what students are hearing about, what students are being exposed to, and possibly have not enough background knowledge to make sense of it, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think it's critical that what they learn in school they can take home and talk about at the dinner table
Hmm.
and talk about those topics to their peers.
Hmm.
You've talked about a lot of things that have always been important and will continue to be important, like high expectations for students. Use what they have, right? If it's a yes, no, we're going to use it and we can still further their learning.
The top of my list is high expectations, and then I think uh, I think the other thing is just do it, even if it's wrong, just do it.
Right. Make mistakes. It's okay.
Mistakes, try it. You could always change it. And I think sometimes we're so afraid to make a mistake that we don't act. And I think sometimes we just need to just do it.
And that does take some planning, though. I feel like the day can get cluttered with a whole bunch of meaningless things. And so I think to just do it, you have to have it built into your schedule that literacy is part of their whole day.
Right. Yeah, a lot of times we'll have somebody say, well, we only have a half hour for literacy a day. And and it's hard to do a lot with literacy if you have students that are multiple years behind. I'm always just give it a half hour. And then what we oftentimes see is that before you know it, they're spending an hour and a half
Hmm.
doing it because their priorities change.
Hmm.
They're saying that, this is more important than other things that I'm doing. And
Hmm.
and so, I think a big part of literacy is you just have to do it. You have to spend the time. You know, the more reading you do, the better reader you become. The more writing you do, the better writer you become. And I think it's just important to get that time and schedule that time. Yeah, I think a lot of it starts with attitude and you know what we want to accomplish. What's the big picture of what we want to accomplish here? And I think that big picture, what's the fundamental thing that we're trying to do here? And
Hmm.
I think that's one of the most critical things is to always keep that in mind.
Yeah, and if you can do that with a team of people, even better, right?
Yeah, I think teamwork is just critical, and how do you build a support system? You mentioned book clubs and uh, I can't tell you the number of schools that use the comprehensive literacy as like a book study.
Hmm.
And they get together and they start talking about that, and that the support that happens from that is, I think, is just incredible and really fundamental to system change.
Hmm.
And for students too, I remember classrooms that would use your books, the start to finish books, and they would have like a coffee clutch. They would have hot chocolate and read a book together, and then um, parents could come in at one point and they'd share about it, and building that community around
Right.
enjoyment of literacy and being able to share ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And uh, that interaction, I think, with other people, I think is critical.
Hmm.
Yeah, we did a book study over Zoom because it was during COVID on Out of My Mind, that book that's now a movie. And all of the girls on the book study were device users. All of them had a different device, and we didn't get our hands in. We couldn't get in there and edit and add vocabulary, do anything. So a lot of our book discussions, we had some open-ended, but to be real, that's super time-consuming to have every participant have an open-ended answer with eye gaze and switch access and all that kind of stuff. So we would have yes, no's, and we would have multiple choice, and we would show the people that were facilitating on the other end, how could you create an experience where you don't have to edit and add everything every minute into their AAC, but you can still see how they're interpreting this part of the story, make predictions about what's coming next. And we'd have a none of the above that would allow them to add their more ideas. But and then it was super fun when the movie came out, and we started to talk about how many great movies that you've seen were actually books to begin with, right? And that's so relatable to that younger age group. Like, oh, this is why reading. I know what's going to happen in this movie because I read the book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think what you're relating to is the whole issue of, having interaction, having
Mhm.
discussion, and and I think that's, you know, another critical piece to this whole puzzle that we're trying to accomplish.
Parents would say, like, she kept me up. She was mad. She said, "We got to read this chapter. Tomorrow's the book club. I got to know what happened. I got to be able to. I got to weigh in." She's like, "Never has she asked to read a book, or me to read to her." Now, again, these girls are now kind of pre-teens, and that's gone by the wayside, reading to the kids before they go to bed because of their age and things. And it was like, nope, not this one though, because there was accountability, right? It was like, oh, I need to weigh in. And by the way, adults too, right? We do comprehensive literacy for all book studies, and it's like, read the chapter because you want to be part of the discussion next week.
Yep,
And I think all of us require some of that accountability around reading.
yep,
And
yep.
I love that idea of the interaction because I think it's not easy to do. Like you said, Brenda, it takes time, but in a classroom, it definitely takes time, and you have to be pretty explicit about making sure that interaction can happen.
Yeah, I remember doing a workshop one time, and this person said, "Gee, with early elementary kids, we work at interaction." And then as soon as they turn to middle school and get into high school, we try to minimize the interaction. You
True.
know, we don't want them speaking. We want them listening. And uh,
Yeah.
and I think it's true.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, Don, you've been at this for a while and you've contributed so much to the field and you've helped students in so many ways that you probably just don't even know, right? And but at the end of your career, what impact do you hope you've made?
Well, I just hope that people have had the opportunity to, have some success with their learning. And um, I get a little scared when people say it's the end of your career because, I'm 74 and I'm still trying to, contribute. I don't work a 40-hour week like I used to, but I do feel strongly that there's a lot that still needs to be done. Uh,
Hmm.
and I think the whole prospect of AI, I think, lends itself to some interesting stuff in the future. It's hard for me to look at what I've been successful with. I just look at what still needs to be done, and there's a lot. So
Hmm. Well, we're lucky that you're going to keep working on those things and you're obviously so passionate about it. It's probably hard to stop you from.
yeah, and I enjoy, both of my kids. I have two sons, and uh, from time to time they go, "You Dad, you need to stop working. You need to stop working." Well, I only work I work about 25 hours a week now. So I have cut down, uh, but I always feel there's important stuff that I need to do, and I really do enjoy uh, the work and the people that I work with.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I just can't imagine not doing that in the future.
Mm-hmm.
As long as I'm able, I'm able and willing to try to move things forward.
This is where your heart is. And we all appreciate it.
Sure.
Thanks.
So, I feel like every Closing the Gap or ATIA, you guys come out with something new. Is there a sneak peek or anything you can share with us professionally about what's on the horizon?
Well, the big thing on the horizon right now is we're working on a progress monitoring tool,
Right.
and so I think that's going to be a big focus going forward. Is there'll be a free piece to it, and again, we're working with Karen Erickson on this. She has I don't know how many beta sites right now that she's working with this, uh, but it's really powerful to look at what indicators are we looking at in order to focus on what needs to be done. And,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm really anxious to collect that information and move forward with it.
Is this
Mm-hmm.
Project VC that you're referring to?
This is Progress Pilot,
Oh, okay. Okay.
and I think VC is the
Has
North Carolina uh, word for it.
Yeah, it has the progress monitoring tool in it. So it's a collaboration of.
We're taking a lot of stuff that, we have two of Karen's students that work at Building Wings, and they got together and they worked on defining this criteria. And then the beta sites that are working on this continue to refine the criteria for, what indicators are we looking at to look for literacy success. So that's been a big focus. We continue to work on Monarch and add new titles. We have 26,000 titles reviewed right now, and we're reviewing a couple thousand books a month, and we're continuing to add new titles to Retopia Go. We'll have the 4th year of Retopia Go done this year. So busy year.
Very
Yeah.
busy. There's a lot for listeners to look into. We'll make sure to put links to all of those things. And we just appreciate your time and good luck with your knee surgery.
Yes.
Thanks. Fortunately, I'm in Arizona for my recovery.
Yes. It's
Good.
nice weather down here, so
High
it's really
climate, yeah.
yes,
Good.
yes.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much,
for
John.
your time. Thank you for
Thank
your
you. Thank you.
service to the entire community.
Welcome. It's been a lot of fun.
The contents of this podcast were developed under contract with the Washington Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, U.S. Department of Education, and administered by Central Washington University. However, those contents did not necessarily represent the policy of the OSPI and CWU, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal and state government.